Mikol melamidai iskalti, I learned from all of those who teach me. Harbe Torah lamati merabotai. I learned a lot of Torah from Rabbanim, which I did. These eyes have seen many great people. Umechaverai yoter mehem. I learned even more from my friends. Umitalmidai yoter mikulam. I learned the most, says Rabbeinu HaKadosh, from my talmidim. Because that achrayut, learning by yourself is important. But knowing that it's a very, very sacred task to give over the Torah. It's not just giving a lecture in some university. Then you can get away with murder. You can say whatever you want. It's a pluralistic world. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. In the Torah, you're not entitled to your opinion. In the Torah, you're entitled to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's opinion. And you better make sure it's right. So you have to prepare and make sure you're giving it over. Emet la'amita shel Torah. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, Hevu zehirim b'talmud, sheshitgat talmud ola zadon. You have to be very careful. Make sure it's straight, glatt, correct. Because otherwise HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to come claim it for you. So Leo was speaking about my lack of humanity. I'd like to attribute that lack of humanity to the Talmidim keeping me on my toes. So thank you very much for that and for all the shailas and making sure, and coming. It's a very, very big mechayev. And of course, it goes without saying that a tremendous chazak baruch and yishar koach to the Nashim Tzidkaniyot, my Rebbitzin, the other Rebbitzins. It's not something to be taken for granted, that's for sure not. Especially, the time that husband and wife spend together is precious and sacred. And for a woman to sacrifice that for her husband to learn is a very, very big deal. And hopefully, I hope, almost 3 years into the game, we're starting to see the fruits of our labor. We're almost halfway through Shas, Rabotai. Gemara, Rashi, V'Tosafot. That's a big deal. And, especially in the Daf Yomi cycle, which in and of itself was created in order to form an unbreakable bond among Am Yisrael. And I've seen it personally. I've experienced it on multiple occasions. People coming over to me, random people from all walks of life, speaking to me in various different languages, some that I don't even understand, about the Daf, and asking me, can we learn it? What questions on the Daf, at weddings, in airports, on planes, in Disneyland. It's happened. It's a tremendous koach. I remember Disneyland. I was actually there, not last year, but 2 years ago. Disneyland. I was there on Psachim Daf Pechet Amud Aleph. I remember that was the Daf that I was learning on line to get on one of the rides. Was Pechet Amud Aleph, and then on the next ride we did Chazara. The kids wanted to go again. It was Pechet Amud Aleph. So that was the thing. I remember. My students, you can ask any student that I ever taught for Bar Mitzvah, I remember based on Parashiyot. I always remember to wish them happy birthday based on the Parashah. And places and events, I remember based on the Gemara. I remember where it was, I don't remember exactly what day it was, but I remember we're learning Psachim Daf Pechet. It's because when you love something, so you associate everything else to that. And the commitment that the Lomdei Daf Hayomi show, that unbreakable commitment is really, that's a labor of love. It's a labor because you really have to exert yourself and you have to put forth the necessary effort, but it's out of love. And I'll tell you a story in honor of the yahrzeit of Maran Zichrono Livracha, without whom none of us would be here today, because it's only in his merit, like it's been spoken, that he was Machzir Atara Le'Yoshna. The fact that you have, forget about in Eretz Yisrael, but even in Chutz La'aretz, a Bet HaMidrash full of Bnei Torah Sfaradim was a concept that was inconceivable almost a couple of decades ago. We were almost, at least from a Torah perspective, off the map. And Maran Zichrono Livracha single-handedly brought back an entire generation and their children and their great-grandchildren, great-grandchildren, Ad Sof Kol HaDorot, back to being on the map, back to being Shem Davar. So much so that even Gedolei Ashkenazim were terrified to open their mouths in his presence because they knew nobody could stand next to him. One time, I'll tell you a love story. Yeah, people like to hear love stories. I'll tell you a story of love. Once, I heard this directly from a Gaon Rabbi David Yosef, the Rosh Bet HaMidrash, where I learned, in Yechavedat, and he said as follows. He says, a chunk of time he used to go every night to learn with his father when he was compiling Sefer Ta'arat Abayit, and he used to go and learn with him Chavruta, and they used to write and edit and revise the Sefer together as they were learning. The Dinah Ta'arat HaMishpacha, very, very, it's Maran Zichron Bracha's magnum opus, then Yabi Omer. So, the Zmanim weren't always Kabbalah. It was usually about 3 to 4 hours a night. Sometimes it was 10 to 2, sometimes later. But sometimes Maran Zichron Bracha had to tweak his schedule because he was a public figure and he had to speak here and give a shiur there and give a chizuk here. And he traveled a lot, so he says, you know what? He told his son, I don't want you to just come. They lived 2 doors down from one another. Maran Zichron Bracha lived in a Kabbalan 45 and the Gaon Cham David lives in a Kabbalan 43. So Mamash right next door. So he said, I don't want you to come and stam waste your time. He says, let me, every night, I have my own schedule. Let me call you. I'll call you a few minutes before I need you, and then you hop over. Fine. And this went on for a long time. One of the nights, Maran Zichron Bracha's wife, Cham David's mother, Rabbanit Margalita Alei Shalom, she was in the house, and he was walking in to learn. His father had just called him, and he was sitting down to learn, and she said, you know, do you want to hear something funny about your father? So he said, sure, go ahead. He says, she told him, ask him, why every night, you know, in Israel, just until about 20 years ago, there used to be, besides for the zip code, phone numbers contain 6 numbers, 6 digits. That's it. Only recently, within the last 20 years, did they have to add, because there's a growth in population, they had to add a 7th digit. And in Yerushalayim, you know, the area code is 02. That doesn't change. So it's all of 6 digits. So she told him, every night your father takes out the phone book. He had like a, you know, phone book inside his desk in the door. And every night he opens it up and takes it out and flips to Dalet, Aleph, Bev, to David, and he opens it up and takes the phone, picks up the phone, 22665, whatever. And every night it's the same thing. So he says, don't you think that's a little, you know, peculiar? So he said, yeah, that's a little weird. Let me ask him. So they were done learning for the night, and he said, Abba, I want to ask you a question, but don't get upset. He said, sure, go ahead. He said, Ima told me that every night before you call me, you take out the phone book and you turn the pages until Dalet, and you find David, and then you punch in the numbers. He says, Abba, you know 80,000 Sfarim verbatim, by heart. Words. Maran Zichron Bracha has corrected the authors of Sfarim. Many times authors used to come to Maran Zichron Bracha and say that he knew their Sfarim, that they wrote, better than they did, even though they wrote it. He says, you know 80,000 Sfarim by heart. You can't remember 6 digits? What do you have to always open the phone book? So he looked down for a second. He says, you wouldn't understand. He says, tell me anyway. He says, I'll explain it to you. He says, I don't love your phone number. So he said, אני לא אוהב את המספר טלפון שלך. He says, I'm not in love with your number. So he thought about it. He says, what? Come again? He says, I don't love your number. That's what he said. Do you understand the depth of those words? Do you understand how profound that thought is? You remember something that you love. You remember a place or a date that something special happened because you love it, so you associate with it. Something that you don't love, in and out. Maran Zichron Bracha was teaching, everybody has a limited amount of brain cells and kochot hanefesh. We have to choose, we have to decide to use it properly. It's not unlimited. You have to apportion it, you have to ration it well. Things that we love and things that we don't. Maran Zichron Bracha was head over heels, crazy in love with the Torah Kedusha. That's all he cared about. And Am Yisrael, it's not really something separate, it's the same. And if he was here tonight, he'd be super proud because he says this is what he worked his entire life for. Torah, and Talmidei Chachamim, and Bnei Torah, and Yeshiva boys, and Kolelim, and not only that, and the Amcha also, and how much time he invested in, you know, people in the, as they say in Hebrew, peripheria. Amei Haratzot also, he spent a lot of time, but the apple of his eye was Bnei Torah. So much so, that before his passing, he told his son, Rav Moshe Yosef, Rav Moshe Yosef actually told me this. He says, my father told me, what killed him? You know, towards the end, he took a very, very sharp turn. He had a fall, but he really, as a result of that fall, he took a really hard hit. He says, Moshe Yosef told me that his father told him, you know what killed him? The draft law. They were busy amending Chok Tal, the law in Israel that exempts yeshiva students from the mandatory draft in Israel. And they were busy. There was a leftist government at the time that was trying to abolish that law and make all sorts of new laws about how to draft Bnei Torah. And he got so deathly ill from the fact that they were trying to overturn that law and mess with the Talmidei Chachamim, he died of sorrow. That's what he said. That's what happens when you're so deeply in love with something and somebody tries taking it from you. That's what happens over time. So, without further ado, tonight's a very interesting night because it's a celebration of a Siyum and it's a sombering commemoration of a Gadol in our midst, the likes of which Am Yisrael has almost never seen, and it's hard to believe that there will be another one like him. But, like Chachamim Zichronon Lebracha teach, Baruch Shemasar Olamo L'Shomrim. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave over the world to be protected by defenders, by guardians. Every generation, Dor Dor V'Dorashav, Yiftach B'Doro Kishmoel B'Doro. Every generation has its Gdolim. Lo Alman Yisrael, Kadosh Baruch Hu never leaves Am Yisrael stranded and hanging. So that being said, Rabotai, let's celebrate the Siyum of Masechet Ketubot. It's been quite a roller coaster ride. It's not an easy Masechet. It's, people say Yevamot is murder. Ketubot is also murder. It's a different kind of murder. It's a different weapon, but it's also very, very difficult. So let's finish off. The Masechet, towards the end, speaks extensively about the Shevach, the praise of Eretz Yisrael, and how it's going to look in the world to come. And the Gemara ends off, Amar Rav Chiya bar Asher Amar Rav, Atidin kol ilanei sirak shebe'eretz Yisrael shit'anu ferot. Eventually, the Atid Lavon, Mashiach comes, even non-fruit-bearing trees, even regular trees, oak and maple and all these trees, even non-fruit-bearing trees will bear fruits. Shneimar, ki ha'etz nasa firyo, te'ena barefen natenu chelam. It says not only will the grapevines and the te'enim, will they have fruits, but even the non-fruit-bearing trees will have fruits as well. Says Rashi HaKadosh. Rashi HaKadosh, we're going to have to say not farewell, but farewell for now until Masechet Sotah. We'll be reunited with Rashi. We'll have two Masechtot now that unfortunately we have a break from Rashi HaKadosh. Nedarim has no Rashi, and Nazir, the Rashi on Masechet Nazir is not Rashi. So Bezat Hashem, Sotah, which starts a day before Pesach, will be reunited with Rashi HaKadosh, and he ends off and says, Midichtiv te'ena, v'gefen natnu chelam, hare eitz peri amun. Ma Talmud lomar, what does it tell you? Ki eitz nasa piryo, af ilanei sirak yis'u peri. Even non-fruit-bearing trees will bear fruit. The Tosafot ends over here and says, Atidin kol ilanei sirak sheberetz Yisrael sheit'anu perot, lefi sherotze l'sayim b'davar tov, lakat lahacha. The Gemara always tries, or at least most of the time, to end off with a nice thought, with a good thought, with a thought that gives chizuk. That's why it says it here. Even though the Gemara took a break, this really goes back to the Gemara before they were speaking about Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara then goes to speak about Yimot HaMashiach, and then comes back here, says Tosfot, the Gemara waited to end off with something positive. Hadran alach shnei dayani gezerot uslik ala Masechet Ketubot. Hadran alach Masechet Ketubot v'adarach anan da'at alach Masechet Ketubot v'da'at achalan. La nitneshe minnach Masechet Ketubot v'la titneshe minnan la be'al mahaden v'la be'al mada'ateh. הדרן ענך מסכת כתובות והדרך עלן דעת ענך מסכת כתובות ודעת החלן. לה נתנשם מנך מסכת כתובות ולה תתנשם מנן. לה בעל מהדן ולה בעל מהדעתן. הדרן עלך מסכת כתובות והדרך עלן דעת ענך מסכת כתובות ודעת החלן. לה נתנשם מנך מסכת כתובות ולה תתנשם מנן. לה בעל מהדן ולה בעל מהדעתן. ינשום לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ומלכותנו, שתורתך אומנותנו בעולם הזה ותעימנו בעולם הבא, חנינה בר פפא רמי בר פפא, נחמן בר פפא, חי בר פפא, במרי בר פפא, רפן בר פפא, אחיש בר פפא, סולחן בר פפא, עדה בר פפא, דרו בר פפא, הרמנה אדוני אלוהינו דבר תורתך בפינו, ופתיות עמך בית ישראל, אנחנו כולנו, בישראל ישראלנו, בישראל ישראלנו, עמך בית ישראל, יראה שמך ולומדי תורתך. מאוהבי תחכימני מצוותיך, כי לעולם הנה, יהי לביתמים חוקיך למען לא אבוש, לעולם לא אשכח פיקודיך, כי בם חגיתני, ברוך אתה, אדוני למדני חוקיך, אמן אמן אמן, סלע ועד. מודים אנחנו לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ומלכותנו, ששמת חלקנו מיושבי בית המדרש ולא שמת חלקנו מיושבי כלנות, שאנו משכימים והם משכימים. אנו משכימים לדברי תורה והם משכימים לדברים בטלים. אנו עמלים והם עמלים, אנו עמלים מקבלים שכר והם עמלים ואינם מקבלים שכר. אנו נוצרים והם נוצרים, הם רצים לשחת ואנו נוצרים לחיי העולם הבא, שנאמר, ואתה אלוהים תורידים לדבר שחת אנשי דמי אמונה, לא ירצו מהם ואני אפתח בך ירצו לבנך אדוני אלוהי. כשם שעזלתנו לסיים מסכת כתובות, כן תעזרנו להתחיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים, לסיימם, ללמוד ולהאמין לשמוע ולעשות קיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה, וזכות כל התנאים ואמוראים ותלמידי חכמים יעמוד לנו ולזרענו, שלא תמוש התורה מפינו מפי זרענו וזרענו עד עולם, ויתקיים בנו בתהליכך תנחותך בשוכבך תשמור עליך והחיצות היית תשיחך, כי וירבו ימיך ויוסף לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינך בשמאלך העושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז לנו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. Immediately after Kaddish we'll have some dancing, followed by תפילת הערבית. So don't go anywhere. יתגדל ויתחדש שמי רבה, בעמד הוא עתיד להתחדתה, ולחיים מתיה, ולסקה לחיי עלמון בבני כרתת ירושלים, ולשכלה לכלה בגבה, ולמעיקר פולחנה מוכרה מהרעה, ולטבע פולחנה דשמעאל להתרב, ימלך קודשה ברכו במלכותה, ויקרב וישמח פולחנה, ויקרב משיחיה, בחייכון ובמכון וחדרו לבית ישראל, בארליו זמן קריב ימנו אמן. ושמי רבה לברך לעלם למעלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר בנו לנסר דדר ותעליף תלן שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילם מן כל ברכתה שלתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמנה בעלמה במנו אמן על ישראל ועל הבנן ועל תלמידהון ועל כל תלמידי תלמידהון דאסכם ולתה קדישתה ובהתראה דין בכל ארבעתה יהיה לנו לכל נמון חנינה וחיסה ורחמי מן קודם הרי שמעי ורעה במנו אמן ישנם רבה מן שמעי חמי סבע בישועה ונחמה וזבה ורפואה וגולה וסליחה וכפרה ורחמה סללה לנו ישראל במנו אמן עושה שלום במרומה ורחמה ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן